All right, this week we're going to jump into some reading comprehension strategies, and we're going to be specifically focusing on the text itself. Sometimes we overlook that critical part when we're talking about comprehension. We're going to define reading comprehension, and we're going to examine effective strategies to support students' reading comprehension in their content area. We're going to deconstruct the characteristics of text complexity and use them to evaluate a representative text from your specific content area. And then how can teachers help students become skilled at making meaning of text? What strategies can teachers implement to help students build reading comprehension autonomy that transfers from domain to domain? Those are our two essential questions for this module. All right, this is a complex text warm-up. Let me go ahead and establish the expectations for you and discuss a bit of the purpose. So I want you to turn to a scratch sheet of paper and take out a writing utensil. You will quickly be exposed to a complex text. You're going to read it through once or twice, depending on how much time you have. I recommend once only. And then I want you to jot down all you can about it. A brief summary, key details and concepts, questions you may have, links that you have to your specific prior knowledge. Don't be intimidated if you can't catch all the details in all the samples. These samples have high-level text demands, which means that they require specific knowledge and skill for comprehension. Then you're going to participate in a think, pair, share to see how much you and your partners comprehended. If you were doing this course strictly online, the only reason that I add number 6 is so you could see how you would adapt a strategy like this in a real in-person classroom. For your purposes, you will be doing it on your own, and you will simply use the slides to check your understanding. Here's the first sample. Pause the screen and allow yourself time to read it through once, maybe twice, but no more. And then jot down summary, brief summary, key details, any connections you have to prior knowledge, what you think this might be about. All right, here's the second sample. Go ahead and label it sample 2. Follow the same procedure. Pause the screen and allow yourself 1, maybe 2 read-throughs, brief summary, key details, any questions you may have, any links to prior knowledge. All right, follow the same process for sample 3. All right, it's our last sample. Pause it, follow the same process. All right, go back and revisit sample 1. And if you were able to have a conversation with a partner, you may have discussed some of these particular nuances that we're going to talk about. If not, these are some of the things that you may have noticed in your own reading of it. So when we talk about the demands of vocabulary and prior knowledge, when we talk about prior knowledge, this means having knowledge before you read something about a word's meaning or a concept's meaning, something that you can attach this new knowledge to it. So here are some terms that maybe you have some prior knowledge and that were somewhat demanding when it comes to the vocabulary. Duty officer, morning watch, non-naval code, German wireless, political section. These are all military terms. And so that might have been something that you noticed right off the bat, that this had a military theme to it. When we talk about some of the academically challenging words, these are words like premonitory, carnage, cartridge. These are words that are a bit more challenging. They have unique meaning. Students can typically use context clues to figure out what they mean, but they might also need to consult the dictionary depending on what the purpose of the text is and the task. When we talk about prior knowledge of 20th century communications, you might have picked up on some terms like telegram, pneumatic tube, wire basket, wireless intercept. These are all words that were part of early 20th century communications. The setting, the date, should have been something pretty important. 1917, we know that it was in January, and we know that it was during a war. We do know we've got the two things: British naval intelligence, and then it says German wireless. So we can infer that there was a war between Britain and Germany. And then these are some of the more nuanced things about the text, a little bit more complex when we're asking students to infer and read into tone. So in Arthur's anti-war sentiment, when we look at the quote, past the halfway mark of a war that had already ground through 30 months of reckless carnage and no gain. So we're getting a little bit of the Arthur's perception of this war. That anti-war sentiment is coming through. Some questions that you may have had: who was Zimmerman? Because if you notice, that is one of the proper nouns that's mentioned here. What was the telegram in non-naval code? So those are some things that you might automatically stand out. And just so that you know, this is the page 3 lets us know that there is an exterior source here. This is from Barbara Tuchman's The Zimmerman Telegram, which Zimmerman itself wasn't actually mentioned in that text, I don't think. So I'm not sure. It must have been a leading question. But that's what this comes from. And of course, we know that based on the date, this is a text that has to do with World War I. So I'm going to give you a moment to pause the screen so that you can kind of reflect on what you wrote down about these particular chunks of text, and then you can reflect on some of the technical vocabulary, academic vocabulary, Arthur's purpose, and then where it actually came from. So you can again pause on the screen and kind of reflect on some of these answers. Here is sample 3, and you can actually do the same thing for sample 3. Go ahead and pause it and reflect on your answers. And lastly, here's sample 4. You can go ahead and pause and reflect on your answers for technical vocabulary, academic vocabulary, Arthur's purpose, etc. So here was the purpose, some of the key takeaways I wanted you to get from this warm-up by looking at this challenging text. Reading comprehension is a complex skill that combines the ability to apply multiple sub-skills with the integration of prior and new knowledge. Even seasoned readers can encounter complex text that challenges their reading comprehension abilities. Our secondary students encounter high-level text demands in our domain-specific courses. Part of our responsibility is to help them break down and make meaning from this text. And we see it in every single domain at our secondary level. The content is simply so specific, whether we are talking about chemistry, whether we are talking about orchestra or music history, whether we are talking about English literature. All of them have very unique, complex texts. Even within our health sciences classes, we sometimes don't realize that the words and the vocabulary themselves are so advanced for our students. They will need support in helping understand, to help them understand what they're reading. Now, this is where the definition of comprehension comes in. Comprehension is the process of extracting and constructing meaning simultaneously through interaction and involvement with written language. The goal of comprehension instruction is to help students understand written and spoken language. We know, based on research and studies, that students who comprehend well can monitor their understanding as they read. They know when they're missing something. They understand when they're missing a detail. They can use what we call fix-up strategies. Some teachers refer to it as fix-it strategies, such as rereading or summarizing, when trying to understand and the comprehension breaks down. They can also relate new information to their prior knowledge, which helps them foster a better and a deeper understanding. So they can relate the new information that they're learning about and they're reading about to either something they've already learned about in previous coursework or their own lives. This transfer ability is what helps broaden their understanding of what they're reading. Many adolescents struggle to self-monitor and repair their comprehension due to a lack of prior knowledge. They have an inability to relate content to prior knowledge, to their own lives and their own lived experiences. They have an inability to read text fluently. And although that is not a skill that we work much with at the secondary level, it is something that you need to be aware of, and it is something that you need to help students with by giving them regular practice to read. They do not have the ability to decode difficult words. They struggle with how to break those down and make sense of the words. They have an inability to attend to meaning while they're reading. So many of them, and you will see this when it comes time to answer questions, they have trouble articulating what they read and answering questions about what they read. They have an inability to use specific comprehension strategies. They have a difficulty understanding the meanings of words. This means technical and academic. And all of these combined, and I just put the source there for you, all of these combined really can make it very difficult for students to become proficient in our content areas, not because they're not capable of learning the material, but because they struggle to read and make meaning of the words. So the 4 components of effective comprehension instruction include purposeful and explicit teaching. And when I say the word explicit, I mean direct. Students do need direct instruction. Classroom interactions that support the understanding of content area texts. Instruction in the skills and strategies used by expert readers. And content area texts that are appropriately matched to students' abilities and the specific strategy being implemented. So content teachers, and this is us at the secondary level, we can improve our students' learning of key concepts and facts if we explicitly teach a few specific instructional routines for reading strategically, consider the unique ways that information can be presented, and make connections to that information. Strategy instruction should be embedded within content-focused text and not practiced out of context. And what this means is each week your peers are going to be presenting a different literacy strategy. Part of your job each week is to go watch that literacy strategy presentation and make meaning for it. Apply it to your own content area. Is it something that you could use in your content area? If so, how? You don't have to leave class knowing all, like there's going to be 12 to 15 of them. You don't have to know every single one by heart, but a few of them are going to really stand out to you as being applicable to your content area. Add those to your toolbox so that your students can benefit from those strategies in the classroom, making meaning of your content. So we want to build reading autonomy and self-efficacy. The goal of teaching comprehension strategies is to help students become active readers who control their own comprehension. We need to scaffold our students' comprehension of complex text by providing a range of appropriate strategies. And we need to help students build confidence for deconstructing complex text so they can transfer those skills to other reading tasks. We're going to look at the middle one just for a moment. And when we talk about scaffolding students' comprehension, this means that we support it in a variety of ways. This means we don't just give them texts with some questions at the end to answer, but we have built in some small group work, some class discussion. We've built in perhaps a graphic, a visual aid or a graphic that they're going to fill out to help them understand their work. We're going to give them opportunities to discuss what they're reading. So we are supporting their comprehension in a variety of ways. So here are 5 comprehension strategies for all students and all subjects. We need to activate and build prior knowledge. We need to ask questions. We need to answer questions. We need to monitor comprehension, and we need to summarize and use graphic organizers. So to activate and build prior knowledge, we know that our students better understand when they can make a connection to something that they already know. So we need to build background knowledge before the reading activity. This should be structured. It should be teacher directed. Background instruction is very important for our adolescents to begin making connections. Prior knowledge helps students filter content, make sense of what they read, and assimilate new information. In addition to direct instruction, some other strategies are anticipation guides, KWL charts, and four-corner activities. Some of these strategies that we're going to be talking about in this particular unit, your peers are going to go into much more detail in their presentations. The next one is answering questions. Students can be taught ways to answer teachers' questions that improve the quality of their answers and the amount of information that they learn as they read. Different questions require the reader to locate answers in different sources, such as the text itself, other reference materials, or students' own prior knowledge. Higher level questions require students to synthesize information to produce an answer or make complex inferences. Teachers must include opportunities for students to deeply process information and relate it to their prior knowledge. In addition, all questioning techniques require that students first understand the concepts inherent in the question. So one of the things that we want to teach our students is the different types of questions that they are going to be required to answer. For example, some questions are simply going to be a preference. We're trying to simply engage them. Others are going to require them to use evidence. So if they're making a claim, we may want to give them a particular template so that they can make sure that they're including every part. They need to restate the answer. They need to provide an answer, their own original answer. They need to cite the text, and then they need to explain it. That's a very basic one called race. But what this is saying is that we need to pose different types of our questions to our students, but we also need to give them the support of templates and stems so that they understand how to answer those questions. The next strategy goes a step further. To monitor their comprehension more independently, students need help determining what types of questions to ask themselves while they read. Generating questions about the text engages readers because it motivates them to persist far more than just the teacher's purposes. Students can be taught to generate questions based on new information they read and then determine if they can answer their own questions by applying that information or relating it to other things that they have read. So asking questions, we can begin to provide them models for this. So if you, let's say that you have a piece of text that's one page. It's awesome if you can provide maybe like 3 guiding questions in the margin that they have to answer. But then part of their assignment should be to develop at least 2 of their own questions. You can give them like a sample of what you're looking for to ask questions. But then we also want to give them an opportunity to actually pose those questions. So perhaps they could pose them to a peer in class. Maybe they could post them to a discussion board and people could answer them. Or maybe they could pose them in a whole class discussion and they could have their peers engage in their questioning. This is a way to really get them to tap into not only what they've read, but what they understand about what they've read. The next one is monitoring comprehension. This becomes increasingly important when one reads explicitly to learn new information, like we do in most of our content areas. Students must be aware of what they do and do not understand and how to use comprehension strategies to repair their confusion. Many students, especially struggling adolescent readers, do not understand what they read and are unaware that they do not understand. So it's kind of back to that thing of you don't know what you don't know. Teachers should explicitly model how to stop, how to reread challenging texts, and should explicitly teach finding the main ideas of paragraphs and explicitly teach students how to use external sources for support. I was recently in a fine arts class and I saw a wonderful strategy. There was a fairly challenging text um, on in their fine arts material, and the teacher had chunked it. So instead of students reading that entire passage by themselves, she had chunked it into 4 main sections. And in each one of those sections, before students moved on, there were a couple of questions that they needed to answer about it, and then they had to, of course, come up with one question themselves about it. Before they moved on to the next chunk of text, they would discuss it with a partner. They would talk about the challenging vocabulary, and then they would talk about it as a class. And so it was a wonderful way that she was modeling how to break down text and not move on until you had a good understanding of what you were reading. The fifth one is summarization and graphic organizers. Once students can state the main ideas of several connected paragraphs, they can learn how to write a summary of a passage. Summarizing requires the reader to synthesize information extracted across a text and restate it succinctly. Students who summarize well are more aware of the text structure and how ideas are related. So they're typically more aware of, for example, if something is written in chronological order, they're more aware of which event led to the next event. If something is presented in a compare and a contrast method, they are more aware of how ideas, the things being compared are similar, and also about elements that they may have in contrast or different than one another. So students, when they can summarize, they're typically better able to understand the structure. And we know that structure is always connected to purpose. So they'll have a better understanding of also typically the central idea. Attention to organizational structure of informational text, in turn, is going to help them locate and keep track of important information. Explicit instruction in summarization improves student comprehension and helps them make connections among main ideas and significant details. Further, adolescents who work collaboratively on summarizing expository texts reach higher levels of comprehension and retention of content information. Essentially, when they can summarize their understanding, and especially if they can work collaboratively in small groups to do this, they're going to have a better chance of actually remembering and retaining what they're reading and learning about. Graphic organizers are also very helpful for students to identify, organize, and remember important ideas from what they've read. The tools derive their name from the 2 features that define them. Graphic simply means a visual representation of visual information, and organizers is a way for students to record information about underlying text structures, see how the concepts fit together, focus on the most important ideas, examine relationships, recall key information, and write well-organized summaries. Your peers are going to present specific strategies that support both summarization and graphic organizers throughout this course in our presentations in the literacy strategies mini lessons. Now we need to jump into text complexity, because when we're talking about comprehension, if we have not selected a text that matches the ability level and interest level of our students, we aren't setting them up for success to comprehend what they're reading. So text complexity is critical. Text complexity is the level of difficulty in reading and understanding, and it's based on a series of factors: the readability of a text, the levels of meaning or purpose, the structure, the conventionality and clarity of the language, and then the knowledge demands of the text. When we talk about quality text, this is what we're referring to. A text language is at or above grade level. The content of the text is appropriately complex. It's connected to themes, concepts, or topics that the students are learning. So when we talk about selecting quality text, these three aspects are what we're talking about. All students, even the most struggling readers, must regularly have access to texts that are at or above grade level. This does not mean students do not also engage with text on their reading level. They may during small groups, but whole group instruction must remain rigorous and complex. So this is what we're talking about, and this happens. Let's say that we have, you're teaching a 10th grade, let's say it's a fine arts survey class in the 10th grade. And the dominant text is written, of course, at a 10th grade level, because typically that's going to be students around the 9th or 10th grade are going to read that. Well, let's say that you have a handful of students in the class who are reading about a 6th or 7th grade level. That's about their ability level for reading. Well, this doesn't mean that we lower the bar of the text, but it does mean that we provide them plenty of support, of adequate quality support, so that they can reach that higher level text. So how do we determine text quality? Text needs to be linguistically complex and instructionally useful based on grade level standards. Teachers use the following criteria to ensure that texts are appropriate and meaningful for their students. It needs to be complex, instructionally useful. It needs to build student knowledge about universal themes, diverse cultures, and other perspectives. They need to be available and include commonly read authors or genres that are mentioned in grade-specific standards. Then it needs to represent major historical events, time periods, popular science, music, and art that are connected to the content areas. It needs to interest students and provide opportunities for building reading stamina and perseverance. It needs to include age-appropriate content, and they need to be authentic and have not been produced to teach narrow, discrete skills. So we're going to use sample one from our warm-up that we did in this lecture to determine the appropriateness for an 11th grade humanities course. Okay, so this is the profile. The course is American Literature and American History. It's combined in a block schedule. It's the 11th grade. The academic ability of the students, they are above average as determined by grade point average and standardized test scores. They're studying a unit on World War I, and the interest inventory indicated that students were interested in spies throughout the war, the role of women and minorities, and how non-soldiers contributed to the war efforts. Other texts that they have studied are have a literature and social studies textbook that depict the time period and representative figures. So we need to ask ourselves, does this, did that text from sample one, did it contribute to, is it a good pairing? Is it a good match? Is it a quality text for this particular profile? So the first things we have to ask ourselves is it rigorous enough? We're going to use, this is something that you're going to have to pause this lecture in order to do this, or you can do it after the lecture. But I have linked this for you. Notice that it's a hot link here. And you have to ask yourself, is it rigorous enough? We're going to use a Lexile level or reading level to determine that. And there's a website where you can actually copy and paste chunks of your text into it, and it will give you the Lexile level. So for the 11th grade, students need to be right here. So they need to be 1295 Lexile to 1610 Lexile. That's what we're going for in this particular band. Some of your students might be slightly below, some of them might be above, but that's what we're aiming for at the 11th grade. We have to ask ourselves, does it meet the standards? Does it meet what was required is required legally by policy of the outcomes that students need to have. So you can pause it, but this is an ELA standard and this is a US history standard that are aligned with the unit of study. And then lastly, does it support students' interests, culture relevance, or perspectives, or other unit materials? And so this is a brief summary of that work. So remember, sample one was Barbara Tuchman's The Zimmerman Telegram. This is a brief summary of the entire work, and it would kind of give you an idea of how it could potentially fit together with the other unit materials. So based on those three things, sample one would have been a very good match for an 11th grade humanities class that was studying World War I. It would have been an excellent, and it was also part of what they were interested in studying about spies, the role of women and minorities in the war. So it would have been a wonderful enrichment piece, whether they read the book in whole or whether they just read a portion of it. It would have been a nice supplement for them. The next thing that we want to look at is taking that sample and now bridging it to what you're going to do, which is your text selection assignment. Now that you better understand reading comprehension and text complexity, your task is to select a text in your content area and build a profile for its appropriateness. Step one is to select the text. Don't select the textbook though, okay? You will be assigned a curriculum to teach. Sometimes it does come with a very specific textbook. I'm talking about things that you could bring in, okay? You can select a novel, a nonfiction passage, a blog post, an online article, something connected to your content area. If possible, link the text or provide a summary of the text. So let's say that you're talking about a specific theorem, maybe in geometry. Well, a really cool thing to do would be where to pull in a brief article about where that theorem is useful. So think about either things going on currently with maybe rockets or space exploration or things that have happened in the past. Maybe a building collapsed or something. And when we look at it, maybe engineers found that the building materials were not to code. And you can talk about that particular theorem, knowing what you know and understand about geometric shapes. Why would that have been useful or important? So that's basically taking what they're learning in math and getting it to have some sort of real meaning for them. You can do the same thing in any content area. So for example, if one of the things that you're trying to do in your physical education classes is to help students better understand how nutrition is connected to overall health, what a cool thing to do, maybe bring in a passage. Right now, high protein, low carb diets are so popular. So it would be a cool thing to bring in a passage about the pros and cons of eliminating food groups from your diet, depending on what students want to do, have them examine it themselves. So there are lots of ways that you can do this, but don't pull in a textbook because your textbook is typically going to be assigned. Pull in a supporting text. Step two is to assess its appropriateness. We're talking about 1, rigor, 2, standards, 3, interest and cultural responsiveness. The rigor part is going to come from the Lexile generator that's on Moodle. You'll actually copy and paste or type in a portion of your text to generate that Lexile level. And then you're going to compare it to that scale so that you can see, okay, if I'm trying to teach an 11th and 12th grade AP music theory class, then is this an appropriate text? Or if it's written at a 6th grade level, that might be a little bit too low. It's not really enough of a challenge for them. Is it tied to standards? the outcome of the course. Those are going to be your Louisiana state standards. Number 3, is it tied to student interest, culturally responsive teaching and perspectives, or the overall unit materials of the unit that you're going to connect it with? And then step 3, based on your findings, you're going to write a justification of your text selection based on the best student profile that it would fit. So you're selecting your text, then you're going to do those 1, 2, 3 of appropriateness, rigor standards, and interest, culturally responsive teaching, unit materials. And then lastly, what student would best match this text? What grade level, subject, unit of study, and then is that something that you want to teach? Is that something that you're interested in teaching? You're going to post your assignment to the discussion board, and then you respond to 2 peers' posts. There is another sample that's provided on the next slide. So this sample is also provided on the discussion board to kind of give you an understanding of the format and how to set it up, what I'm looking for. But this is the text selection assignment. So step 1, and this is actually hyperlinked on the discussion board if you wanted to check out the full thing. But it's a brief online article about Sophie Germain, who was a female math student who was self-taught, and she pursued math in spite of her parents' punishments. The rigor, it's at a 1010 to 1200 Lexile level, which the grade band for that is 6 to 10. The standards that it accomplishes, Algebra 1 says to interpret expressions that represent a quantity in terms of its context, and that's actually something that this article talks about that Sophie Germain became pretty famous for in that particular math aspect. It's about a female mathematician who was instrumental in shaping number theory and applied mathematics. It supports our study of algebra and can be used in multiple ways throughout the curriculum. Step 3 would be that justification. Algebra 1 is typically taught in grades 8 and 9. Some students take it in grade 10. This is about age 13 to 14. Again, some students take it as 15, depending on their progression. So the Lexile level is appropriate for the standard that I selected. Also, the inclusion of an important female mathematician is culturally responsive and could be engaging for students. Germain was instrumental in number theory, especially positive and negative integers, so this could be used to support an introduction to our study of those concepts. Again, we're helping our students build prior knowledge and make connections through text to what they're learning about.